Good afternoon, and welcome to the 72nd edition of the Winter Show. We're so grateful to have you with us this afternoon. As America's leading art, antiques, and design fair, we are very proudly owned by and benefit Eastside House, and all of the proceeds from this show support Eastside House's life-changing mission of helping New Yorkers in need. So your support here today means that we're actually transforming New Yorkers' lives, and we're truly grateful to you for that. This afternoon's panel, Lines of a Nation, Early American Drawings and Their Legacy, is presented in partnership with the Drawing Foundation and in association with Master Drawings New York, and we're delighted to welcome you here with us. Together today, our panelists will explore how we define early American art and when drawings truly begin to feel distinctly American, especially when many artists were trained in Europe. So without further ado, I'm going to call Daniela Berman to the stage, to the podium, to make introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you to your wonderful team here at the Winter Show. I'm Daniela Berman, Director of Partnerships and Programs at the Drawing Foundation, and we're so happy to be partnering with the Winter Show once again. The Drawing Foundation, if you don't know, is a nonprofit dedicated to bringing together the community of individuals interested in drawings, from curators and other scholars, conservators and collectors, to dealers and makers. We offer programming throughout the year and invite you to check out our website for upcoming programs, as well as a robust archive of past events. For this week, known to many as Drawings Week, which we kick off today, we are pleased to present our programs in association with Master Drawings New York 2026. On their behalf, we invite you to visit the 36 participating dealers whose exhibitions will be opening this afternoon and will be on view through next Saturday, February 7th. I'm particularly delighted to introduce today's panel of individuals I so admire as curators, scholars, and colleagues. We asked our panelists to think about early American drawing, questioning every part of that term, early American and drawing. The topic of what makes the category American is always an important question, but at our politically acute moment, it takes on even more weight. We hope that this panel will provide not an escape from the issues facing us today, but a recontextualization. The Drawing Foundation's mission centers on bringing people together in community and on a belief that the power of historical art to speak to contemporary issues. And I think this panel will do just that. When we asked our panelists to interrogate the ideas and categories of early American and drawings, we asked them to think about it in terms of their specific projects, but also more broadly. I'm so excited to hear their thoughts and answers to those questions that they'll offer today. But to be honest, I'm even more excited about the subsequent set of questions today's conversation will raise that I hope we will all continue discussing in the magnificent halls of the Winter Show and while scurrying in the cold between Upper East Side galleries and the Drawing Foundation's programs in the week to come. And now I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend of many, many years and one of the smartest, most generous, and definitely most optimistic colleagues I could ever hope for, Amy Torbert. Amy is the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Associate Curator of American Art at the St. Louis Art Museum. She specializes in 18th and 19th century paintings and works on paper. Her current exhibition project is Picturing Independence, which opens in June of 2026. Drawing on SLAM's permanent collection, the show explores how artists have depicted acts of American rebellion across 250 years. She was previously the co-curator of the show The Work of Art, the Federal Art Project, 1935 to 1943, and Art Along the Rivers, a bicentennial celebration, both at the St. Louis Art Museum. She holds a PhD in art history from the University of Delaware and an MA from Williams College graduate program in the history of art. So Amy, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Thank you as well to the Winter Show and Helen and her team and Anderson and Jason for making all of this tech possible. I am so grateful to the Drawing Foundation for selecting American drawings for the topic for this year's Winter Show panel. The decision was motivated, as we just heard from Daniela, really, I think, in large part because of the anniversary that is now upon us. Of course, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. While I'd argue, and I bet my panelists and everybody in this room would agree, that there is no wrong time to focus on studying or collecting works of American art, this milestone brings with it really an increased appetite, I hope, and a more urgent need to consider the role that works of American art have played in shaping our conceptions of the nation's founding. So, what do we mean by American drawings? And Daniela hinted at this too. The nationality question is one that we will take up in conversation, the four of us. But I wanted to kick off this panel with a few, perhaps deceptively simple definitions. I very much appreciate that the Drawings Foundation adopts an expansive view of drawings. So generally speaking, right, drawings are created by artists making marks on a surface, using tools or instruments, as opposed to think of a printing matrix like a copper plate or a lithographic stone. Drawings are generally executed on paper, though of course not always. Think of an artist beginning a canvas with an underdrawing. And the range of media considered to be drawings can be staggeringly vast. Graphite, ink, chalk, charcoal, watercolor, pastel, silver point, the list goes on and on. And so this wide range of media really reflects drawings' equally wide range of uses and purposes. Drawings participated in nearly all aspects of American cultural, political, and technological developments from the 18th through 20th centuries, and I can look to contemporary colleagues who might say still today that is true. To name just a few, so I'm thinking of drawing's fundamental role in education and artistic training, its use by artist explorers to create topographical landscapes and scientific studies, and by engineers to design technological marvels like the Brooklyn Bridge. Of course, I'm thinking of the Met's great exhibition of those drawings that's up right now. And then also the rise of watercolor to become known as the American medium by some for fine art in the mid-19th century. So, to tackle such a wide-ranging and expansive topic, we've brought together a group of experts who have distinct vantage points on the study and collecting of American drawings. So for our panel, each of our three wonderful speakers will offer some short remarks, which will then lead into a conversation, which will then be followed by Q&A. So, without further ado, our first speaker is Mark Mitchell, seated to my left. Mark is the Holtom T. Green Curator of American Paintings and Sculpture at the Yale University Art Gallery in New Haven, Connecticut. He completed his doctorate at Princeton University and previously worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, National Academy Museum, Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College, and Princeton University Art Museum. His most recent exhibition is The Dance of Life, Figure and Imagination in American Art, 1876 to 1917. But as we will hear more in a second, the exhibition is up in London right now, maybe with a different title. And so with that, it's over to you.
I'm so pleased to be here. As Amy says, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a show that has 2 weeks left at the National Gallery in London. And has been my primary project for the last few years. This was a show that was on view at Yale last fall, called fall before last now, at Yale, called The Dance of Life. Now it is called Edwin Austin Abbey by the Dawn's Early Light. The nice thing for today is that I get to focus on Abbey a little bit more than I did in our show, but I am going to talk a bit about this moment in American art from 1876 to 1917, and the moment that this represents for American drawing in particular. This is a time when we really see the artistic training that is offered in academies throughout Europe and the United States to bring artists into their forms and to help them explore what art's potential is. That study predominantly of the human figure. When we think about artistic training, we are largely talking about drawing. And so it is always a good reminder when coming together to talk about a subject like this, that drawing is the sort of point of origin for artists, aspiring artists. And that was the subject of my dissertation at Princeton, was how artists became artists in the 19th century. And predominantly that is the story of drawing, which brought me to these great collections of drawings. I recatalogued the American Drawings collection at Princeton. And then I got my first job at Dartmouth, where I worked with drawings like the one that you see on the screen by Herman Dudley Murphy, a student drawing that he made in the moment that he was transitioning from Germany to Paris. And for me, this was a sort of great moment. Researching this drawing really helped me, or reminded me, of the sort of formative nature of drawing and artistic practice, especially throughout the early 20th century, but all the way up to this moment. And in American art, this is a time when that study really becomes relevant. Before this time, we're more often talking about landscape. We're talking about genre painting. We're talking about different forms, different subjects that are not really rooted in the human figure. So you go to art school and you do your life studies, but you don't really use it in American art much before this moment. But all of a sudden, you have these artists centering the figure, especially the monumental figure, and it becomes the sort of paramount form. So all of a sudden, these student drawings become incredibly important for these American artists coming of age in a period after the Civil War, when suddenly public art becomes central to the wider culture in the United States. So you see Herman Dudley Murphy here drawing a model exactly as he sees him. The student drawing, the full-length drawing on a full sheet, is called an academy. This is the sort of rudiment of becoming an artist, this very kind of drawing. And what you see is the sort of veins protruding from the hands and the feet. You see the figure standing still for a long period of time. You see that impact on the body, the swelling of the ankles. You see a body experiencing this pose over time. And that sense of really describing what you see, that is the nature of learning to be an artist in this period. And it is the foundation of this moment for artists like Murphy, for Kenyon Cox, who you see at the left, Frederick MacMonnies, whom you see at the right. Another beautiful drawing from the Met lent to our show. Thank you there. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to think about how student work and that experience was not just sort of a chance for these artists to develop their practice, but these are the first drawings they show to anybody. This is how you get into art school. You have to put together a portfolio. When Kenyon Cox wanted to go to the École des Beaux-Arts and join Gérôme's studio, he showed him that drawing of Michelangelo's Night, and he kept it for the rest of his life. He wrote articles about Michelangelo. This was like the through story of his journey. It was so imperative to him to be able to really center that very thing in his practice that it not only sort of got him in, but it preserved him and kept him going over the decades. Similarly for MacMonnies, although in a slightly different vein, MacMonnies had this epic breakthrough in Paris where he was in Falguière's studio, and he had this sort of moment where his work was really recognized, and to reward him, he was given a show of his charcoal drawings of the figure, like this one. This is this pivotal moment when he is suddenly recognized. The first works that he's showing are drawings. The artist centered in our exhibition, of whose works we have the entirety of his career at Yale, is Edwin Austin Abbey. And this was the sort of point of genesis for our exhibition. Every medium that Amy so beautifully listed of drawing in America is practiced by Edwin Austin Abbey. He is one of these polymathic people who works in everything. He considers himself a workman. He is not like his friend John Singer Sargent, who could do everything beautifully from day one. He has to discipline himself and work through it steadily, applying himself, and he keeps adding new media, new forms, and drawing is 7/8 of those forms. It is so integral to his practice to explore his ideas. And not only that, and this is where I think a lot of people are surprised by this moment in American art, these drawings, like the one you see here, you see the squaring off, you see the signature and the date. A lot of people, art historians, full professors, tell me drawings aren't really what the artist wants you to see. This is working doc, it's like his notes. Well, I'm here to tell you that Edwin Austin Abbey published this drawing in Harper's and made it internationally recognized by making it available for reproduction and sharing it widely. It was one of his many, many drawings for commissions for the Boston Public Library and then the Pennsylvania State Capitol in Harrisburg. This one's for Harrisburg. And it became crucial because it took a decade to create some of these works. It became essential that he be able to show some of what he was working on over time, because he couldn't just wait 10 years to show a product. And so drawings became a way for him to show his ideas in progress. And works like this one, so expressive, so powerful, so symbolist in many ways, it really accentuates the emphasis of his art and brings it to a very fine point. To John Singer Sargent, probably the exception to the rule, somebody whose work in drawing we really do know from this period and who really is recognized, and we do show it constantly. And thanks to his sisters, his works are everywhere, and so there is this sort of huge recognition. My project with Abby has been the opposite. Everything went to Yale in 1937. 3,000 works of art by one artist. It's all at Yale, which is a kind of a curse, because it means that no one else is incentivized to bring forward his work. Sargent is studied every day, everywhere, because his work is so widely distributed. Abby has had the opposite journey. And so my project in this remarkable moment that we're in has been to reintroduce Abby and to show how drawing was really integral to his whole conception of his work, including his public reputation. Sargent was the virtuoso. Sargent was the one who never did anything wrong. He picked up a piece of charcoal as a young child and was immediately the sort of recognized master. His fellow students in Paris just said, you know, he just showed up one day like Athena and just rolled in here like a fully mature, powerful, divine figure, drawing like a master. Abby did not. Abby had to build, had to study, had to work. He was constantly jealous of Sargent and that innate genius that Sargent got to channel. This is a work that's on view in London. This drawing, and I'm kind of building my case here in case anybody here wasn't. You're probably already fans of American drawing. But this is 7 feet across, predominantly white chalk on dark brown paper. Each figure is described with a different visual logic. So each is an individual character described using a very different characterization, a different side of the chalk, a different kind of hatching or toning. Every single figure has a totally different character from all the others. There are 7 individuals. Did I remember the number right? More than 7. 8. That is a really remarkable and astonishingly ambitious effort in drawing, the medium that sometimes gets overlooked and bypassed as something that's perhaps not as, it is a sort of like a note, it is a study, it's not really the work that the artist wants you to see. Well, I'm here to tell you, Abby wanted you to see these, and when he died, his friend Sargent picked the illustrations for his 2-volume biography by Charles Verrell Lucas, Edward Verrell Lucas, and it was the studies that he used to illustrate the biography. Do you think Sargent didn't know how Abby wanted to be remembered? Abby took up new form after new form, and this drawing for me, this drawing, A Study for Ophelia in Hamlet, is one of his most gorgeous pastels. And he takes that pastel in the late 1890s and is immediately, it's interesting, they like them in London where he lives, but he sends them over to New York and they sell out immediately. This is where his market is for these. But what I find especially remarkable is how the energy that runs through the hair just radiates. There is so much life. And for me, that's what the metric for these artists as draftsmen is, but also it is the metric of this time for what an artist should be. That sense of vitality, being able to express energy and life through the body. That is really this age in terms of what everyone from critics to patrons to artists is looking for from these works. And this study, for me, this gorgeous pastel, is one that really, in sort of shimmering color, tells that story so effectively. My last slide is this one, A Study for the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893 in Chicago. This is a drawing that really, for me, kind of pulls together all the aspects of this time. Because what also I'm just like addressing all the sort of perception issues that I've heard over the past year is people have been like, yeah, but what about? Isn't this old-fashioned? Well, not in this period it wasn't. And I'm here to tell you that this figure, the telephone and the ticker, is imagining a device that you could use to call someone anywhere in the world and check real-time stock quotes. Can you imagine? 1893, and you see the sense of J. Carroll Beckwith using a monumental figure of a modern woman, a highly muscled woman. This is not your shrinking violet. This is not your, ancient Roman ideal. This is a modern laboring woman who is being used as the emblem of her time and the potential of electricity and technology to transform life. I would be interested to hear if you have speculations about what could be more modern. So here we are on this monumental scale for the World's Columbian Exposition, imagining what the body can do. And we are doing that, developing those ideas in drawing. And I want to conclude with a quote from John Lafarge, who I admire greatly, and he offers such great insights. He's one of the just most articulate artists of this time. And he says, "In the master's drawings and studies for a given work, I met him intimately, saw into his mind, and learned his intentions and character, and what was great and what was deficient." What Lafarge wanted to do was to use drawings as a way to understand the craft and the creativity of other artists, and these works provide us that access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I couldn't imagine a better way to kick off this panel. Really, you set the terms for so many questions and ideas to follow. So our next speaker is Christina Michelon. She is the Pamela and Peter Voss Curator of Prints and Drawings at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. She received her PhD in art history from the University of Minnesota. As a specialist in the visual and material culture of the United States, Christina was, and uphold your applause here, but she well deserves it, recently elected a member of the American Antiquarian Society. Christina was previously a curator of special collections at the Boston Athenaeum, where she led a permanent collection reinstallation and several special exhibitions, including Alan Rohan Crite, Griot of Boston. Most recently, Christina co-curated Of Light and Air, Winslow Homer in Watercolor, about which we will hear more now. Christina.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you to the Winter Show and the Drawings Foundation for gathering us together here today. So I'm excited to speak to you all about a special collection within the MFA's Prints and Drawings collection, and that is the M&M Karalik collection of American drawings and watercolors. And I'll kind of just speak informally about some of that material and just share a few exciting works from that collection, and then talk a little bit about Winslow Homer. So we'll pass through a few decades. I should say the MFA's Prints and Drawings collection, we steward about 250,000 objects, and the Karalik collection sounds small in comparison to that, but it's about 3,000 objects, and that's just part of our American Works on Paper. And it ranges, it's primarily drawings from about 1815 through the Civil War, and the so-called Barren period in American art, which that was really, I think, the Karalik's collecting focus just for that reason, to demonstrate that there was so much, creative activity happening during these dark ages in American art. So Maxim Karalik really led the charge in collecting the works on paper, and Maxim Karalik was born in the Ukraine, what is now the Ukraine, and was an opera singer who immigrated to the United States and met Martha Codman, who was Old Money Boston, and the two of them just really committed themselves to collecting American art, ranging from decorative arts to American painting to American works on paper. And their collection ranges from more academic painting and drawing to folk art, and also the Civil War, which we'll talk about as well. And so just some highlights here. So these are two amazing watercolors by Mary Ann Wilson, who is considered maybe one of the first American watercolorists. She lived on a farm in upstate New York with her partner, and her paints were possibly made from natural sources on her farm, juices of berries and things like that. Although one of our colleagues in the paper lab at the MFA has done some research and thinks that there may have been some pre-made materials at her disposal. But something I'm really interested in is the relationship between drawing and print and kind of intermedial conversations, and for that matter, conversations between works on paper and more three-dimensional things such as decorative arts. And we'll talk a lot about, drawings that become prints in a moment, but what I think is really fun about Mary Ann Wilson's drawings here is that she often would use print sources for her drawings. And so she would make these and often sell them to the farmers in her general vicinity. And I mean, I'm just so charmed by Henry on his pet goat. I just had to include that here. And this is just two examples of, I think, the 8 to 10 Mary Ann Wilson works we have in the collection. I think about only 22 or so are known and out there. So this is really exciting, and I hope someone can come and do more research on these. If it's not me, I think she deserves a lot more attention. And I just had to include also our giraffe because he's beloved. And, when we think about drawing, we're picturing charcoal and chalk and graphite and watercolor, but also stencils and even collage in a way. And, this picture is created with stencils, which I think adds to its charm. And so just an example of some of the folk art works that Kerelic collected. And then Eunice Pinney, who's, along with Mary Ann Wilson, considered one of the first American watercolorists, Morning Picture. And I also love this Chapin Solitude watercolor, which, both of these clearly share a visual vocabulary with embroidery and samplers. And what's so fascinating about the Chapin piece, if you look really closely, the tree especially, you can kind of see the brush strokes look like stitched threads. So there's not only just a kind of iconographic compositional relationship to embroidery here, and needlework, but it's actually part of the way that she's making this picture and referencing those other materials. And some fracture work. And so I mentioned on the right, there's some collage there. There's a incredible collection of this fracture material, and really in choosing some of these examples, I just wanted to show like the diversity just within this one collection. And I think Kerelic's understanding that drawing can mean so many things, and it is intended for so many different uses, as Amy pointed out in her introductory remarks. So some of these are, documents. Others are, as Mark was describing, very much about process, meant to be private, others meant to be shared. And I think that's something that just makes me keep coming back to works on paper because of all of these different contexts and idiosyncrasies. And I mentioned, again, many of the kind of academic artists who are featured in the Kerelic collection, including Thomas Sully. And again, we have these process drawings, such as the sheet of figure studies, William Sidney Mount, just an example of like a fantastic genre scene. And then also really finished works like this William Trost Richards watercolor. But some of my favorite pieces in this collection are these preparatory drawings for prints, and there's several examples of Fanny Palmer's work. So Fanny Palmer was probably one of the most respected illustrators for Courier and Ives, the printmakers, and we have several examples of her preparatory drawings as well as preparatory watercolors that would then become lithographs at Curator and Ives. And it's just, I think, incredible, again, to just go back to these working processes and think about the ways that, artists are working through things on paper, whether it's meant to become a work on canvas or a kind of mass distributed print. And so now we arrive at Winslow Homer. These are two of my favorite works in the Kerelic collection. Those of you who don't know, Winslow Homer was born in Boston in 1836, and he, I guess kind of like Sargent, showed, a propensity toward drawing. We have a wonderful childhood drawing in our collection that he actually adapted from a Curator and Ives print. So it's like, it's all coming full circle. It's a figure of a rocket ship. It's kind of, he's riffing on his father going west during the gold rush. And he's about 11 or 12 years old at this time, and makes this drawing. And his parents, I think, recognized, this talent that he had, and so they get him an apprenticeship at a lithography studio in Boston, and he then, of course, becomes a illustrator, commercial illustrator, working freelance for Harper's Weekly and some other publications. And it's incredible that we have some of his original drawings that became prints. And so when the Civil War broke out, Harper's Weekly sent Homer down to the front lines, and he is sending back drawings like this. And I'll just back up a little so you can see the detail. The work on the left from Yorktown, he wrote "Sketched from Life" in the corner there. I love that one because it's so almost foreshadowing of this pastoral work that he's going to be doing just a few years later, especially once he starts working in watercolor. And these two drawings, so you see them becoming two of these vignettes in this Harper's Weekly spread. These two drawings, I think, were so important to include in an exhibition about watercolor that, as Amy mentioned, I co-curated with Ethan Lasser at the MFA, just sadly closed on January 19th. But it was so important to include these because not only is it demonstrating Homer's foundation in composition, but these are also watercolor adjacent techniques. We, in our gallery tours, kept saying, it's watercolor without the color in a lot of instances. And so Of Light and Air, Winslow Homer in Watercolor was an exhibition that came together very quickly, but we were able to do that because the MFA holds the largest collection of Winslow Homer's watercolors in the world. So this is a really fun slide I put together with the majority of those watercolors. We have 47, and a lot of them are Adirondack scenes. He loved the Adirondacks. And again, those drawings were so important in a gallery we called Origins, where we're thinking about these early days, his apprenticeship at a lithography shop, his training as a commercial illustrator, and the way that he continues to collaborate with printers, actually. So you can see on the left side of this slide, there's two pictures that look almost identical. One is a watercolor and one is a chromolithograph. The print was made by Louis Prang, who is a really important Boston printer. And yeah, I mean, when we think about, as Amy had said, the watercolor becoming, the American medium, I think people were really shocked to learn that, Winslow Homer didn't start painting in watercolor until he was 37. But there's a reason for that. One, he did paint in watercolor a little bit before that time when he really commits himself to doing a series in Gloucester, Massachusetts in the summer of 1873. But his mother was a watercolorist, and we were able to include a few of her botanical studies thanks to the generosity of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. And she began exhibiting her watercolors in the 1870s, which is the same time Homer's exhibiting his watercolors, which is the same time like most American artists are exhibiting their watercolors, right? Because we have the foundation of watercolor societies in New York and in Boston and in Philadelphia. And so it's not that shocking in a lot of ways that Homer then shifted to this other medium. It was something he could be successful in, financially as well. And so something he was happy to pursue. I also think a lot about ephemerality in my work. And again, the fact that we have some of these, sketches that maybe shouldn't have been saved necessarily, or in the case of these drawings, these wash drawings that were made to just become prints. The fact that we still have them, I think, is just so special. And yeah, I just keep coming back to also that intimacy of works on paper, the way that, you're asked to sit with them and look closely at them. And I just wanted to also show the contrast between some of this early work and in the exhibition. We started with some of his graphic material and then end with his really incredible watercolors. This is our Northwoods gallery, so it's a lot of Adirondacks and southeastern Canada. And to just end with one of the best Homer watercolors in our collection, so the Adirondack Guide. And I just wanted to share, we spoke with a working Adirondack guide who's also an artist. Her name's Rachel Finn, and she came in to look at the watercolors and talk to us about the Adirondacks and what it's like to be a guide. And she stared at this watercolor for a long time and then said to me, I wonder what he heard. What did he hear that made him turn around? And that's just really stuck with me. Every time I look at this watercolor, I wonder that myself. And, certainly Homer posed this figure who's probably Rufus Wallace, one of his friends and frequent models. But I think it just helps evoke so much of the atmosphere in this watercolor. So we thought a lot about just the way that Homer is conjuring different environments and the way that he's using watercolor, the way that he's using it as an observational tool. And, just the way that your eyes and ears are always attuned to the natural environment when you're a guide. I think it also is kind of a nice metaphor for looking at drawings, just the way you just really, your senses are heightened, and I think you're just really kind of drawn into the works a bit more. Anyway, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Christina. Gosh, I want to go out and start looking closely at drawings and watercolors right beyond that door. But first, we have our third speaker who may need no introduction, probably needs no introduction to most of us in this room, but I'm delighted to share one. So Stuart P. Feld is president and director of Hirschl Adler Galleries in New York. He received his A.B. from Princeton University in 1957 and completed his graduate studies at Harvard University. Feld began his career at the Addison Gallery of American Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he rose to associate curator in charge of the Department of American Painting and Sculpture. Since joining Hirschl Adler in 1967, he has played a central role in shaping the study and market for American art and decorative arts from the colonial period through the 19th century. Stuart.
Thank you. And thank all of you for coming out on this memorable New York day just to see a bunch of old drawings. By virtue of what I do professionally and having built for clients a number of formidable collections over the years, I've often pondered the question of why certain people collect and how they begin. When I first visited the Metropolitan Museum at the age of 13 with my class from a school in New Jersey, I was particularly struck by Eastman Johnson's Hatch family, which has been in the collection for a great many years. Fast forward 14 years, and I was now a newly appointed member of the staff of the Department of American Paintings and Sculpture. When I arrived at work one day, the curator for whom I was working was in a very depressed state over the fact that the evening before, the acquisitions committee had turned down the purchase of 2 drawings for the Hatch family, saying that there was no need to acquire the drawings since we already had the painting, which is a sentiment that I think would not prevail today. Since I loved that painting so much and for so many years, I asked if there would be circumstances under which I could buy it, and since I was told the museum had made a negative decision, why not? And I was thrilled to be able to own a part of that extraordinary commission. Not long after that, I saw this Eastman Johnson drawing at a dealer's in New York. It's a study for his genre painting called The Embers, and I decided to buy it. And I thought, wouldn't it be an interesting thing to put together a collection of drawings for specific American paintings? Well, that thought, as interesting as it was quickly derailed when I could not resist this drawing by William Bradford, which ultimately in our travels through American drawings became one of 4 in the collection. In those days, there was hardly any publication that one could turn to. There was the 2-volume catalog of the Carolick collection, which came out in 1962, and there were excellent biographies of many of the artists, but very little specific about individual drawings. There was also the book that the Slatkins had put together, which was largely a picture book, and which was actually quite helpful. So the learning curve was basically learning by looking. And I looked and looked at the art dealers, at auctions, large and small, at antique shops. How often did one see American drawings hanging in a museum? Not very often. And over 64 years, we've assembled a collection that spans the years from 1725 to 1920, not including modernism, which I always thought was really a separate collection. Speaking of 1725, another early memory was attendance at the Park Burnett auction of the renowned Norvin Green collection of Americana in 1950. I'd like to say that I was 4 at the time. I was so impressed when a family friend bought 2 of a suite of 3 Henrietta Johnston pastels of the Moore family. Henrietta Johnston was the first professional female artist in America. Again, fast forward to 2008, when 2 identical portraits of the Moore family turned up at Sotheby's in one of the January Americana performances, with extraordinary documentation that not only established that they were the originals of 2 of the 3 green portraits, but also that the parallel green portraits bought by my friend were copies made in 1830. All of this was somewhat confused by the disconcerting fact that the original artists supplied frames on the 2 originals were removed in 1830 and had been put on the copies so that the 2 copies would match the one remaining original, which was of the mother and father's daughter. Happily, I was able to track down the 2 copies, one of which still remained in the family of the buyer at the green sale. And with the aid of Marjorie Shelley at the Met, we were able to confirm that the copies were on manufactured paper circa 1830, a kind of expertise which, alas, I've never developed. And the originals were happily on beautiful laid paper of the 18th century. Through more than 60 years of looking, I have encountered only about 6 or 7 church drawings outside of those collections. And happily, we were able to acquire 2. One, a highly finished work that he had given to his early patron, Cyrus Field, and the second from an album Amicore, an album put together by friends of whoever for a celebratory reason. The drawings of Asher B. Durand are largely at the New York Historical Society, and it was through, you cannot imagine the effort, that we were able to put together a group of 3 of them. And I could go on and on in this respect, I suspect that portfolios of other drawings were likely destroyed as drawings were of relatively little interest. Interest in drawings really became a passion for us, as is evidenced by this Sargent drawing of Madame Gautreau, which just traveled between the Met and the Orsay in Paris, and this Bingham drawing, which is but one of 3 outside of the captivity of the group that now is owned jointly by the states of Missouri and Kansas. And so we have managed over these many years to collect American drawings on what I hope can be considered a master drawing level, with almost every American artist of stature included, and with large groups of drawings by Thomas Sully, John Singleton Copley, Eastman Johnson, John Singer Sargent, and others. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you all so very much for sharing those images, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your projects. Maybe to comment on thoughts on American, thoughts on definitions so the questions that Daniela had raised in her introduction. How do we define American when thinking about drawings, when thinking about, as Daniela had said, so many artists and who studied in Europe and who also connected back and forth with Europe? Are these useful questions to ask, in your opinion, to think about how specifically American works? And then also in terms of time periods, does the definition of American change depending on the time period that we're thinking about? Thoughts, responses?
I guess I'll start by saying that whenever possible, when referring to artists associated with the United States specifically, I try to say, art of the United States versus American artist. Of course, at the MFA, we have the Department of the Art of the Americas. So when we say American art, it includes Canada, it includes, what we think of as the Americas. So better to specify art of the United States when we can. But I think generally, I find I'm just less interested in the question of what is American art? And I guess a little more interested in just doing what I want to do with the objects I'm examining. And if anything, I think it's more interesting to think regionally, right? Like what's happening in New York that's not happening in Boston, or vice versa. What's going on in Chicago, what's going on in the West Coast. And so I think that those are the questions that I tend to focus on a little bit more. I'm also a pretty really interested in media and process, and so I tend to ask a lot of questions about that. But yeah, so I guess you sort of hinted, Amy, is this the question we should be asking? And I'm personally I'm just a little less interested in that. I think just because, right, it's always shifting. It's a hard time to be an Americanist, and I think I think we should just focus on doing interesting work on these objects versus kind of quibbling about nationality. Yeah.
I think there are certainly artists who were born in America, their drawings are American drawings. Then there are artists like Mary Cassatt, who spent most of her career abroad, and those are certainly works by an American artist. Not in the drawings field, but it could easily become a factor there. An artist like Robert Salmon, who was an English artist who came to America, and in the burgeoning market for American paintings, American collectors have also bought works by him that were painted before he arrived here. My own feeling is that those are not to be considered American works. The same thing is true of any number of other artists. But American artists working abroad, those are certainly to be considered part of the American canon. But it has been dramatically expanded, partly for commercial reasons, during the period when American art has been so avidly collected.
I think, it is a great question and one that really does kind of come to our moment. For me, the opportunity to engage with works of art that I find specially fascinating, and they invite my curiosity. I want to linger with them. I want to really look at them and explore them, and they sort of inspire me to keep thinking and keep looking and try to build bridges between objects, between artists, between places, between ideas. For me, that's where the joy of the field is. And so my work is rooted in the objects themselves. And I feel like sometimes the questions that an object raises for me draws me to one direction, and that might be more geographic or community. I too find region often more immediate for a particular artist. But I've been working on Abbey, who spent his entire adult life in London. And so, there is a kind of richness there. He was known as an American in London, and so he sort of created that aura around himself. So I do ask those questions, but I feel like more often the immediate question that I want to think about is, how does the art best open up and help us to find meaning and inspiration and what the artist wanted to communicate about those ideas? And so I don't linger on nationalism per se. I do recognize that for me personally, I often find an immediacy of connection in historical American art. I feel a sense of understanding that is often deeper and fuller than I feel in other cultures. And so for me, that's why I'm an Americanist. But I recognize that it's really, for me, the nature of what the art wants that pushes me and helps me to kind of widen the circles of the art and its meanings and associations, rather than trying to put it in a box. I don't think that that's really constructive for the art.
So, having established that maybe regions is a more interesting way to approach and think about groups of objects, or even just individual encounters, as Mark was saying, and one of you used the word intimate, right? That really seems to describe an encounter with a drawing. I'm going to ask another question about categories, because it's one that's been on my mind a lot, which is, at least two of us on the panel, when we received the invitation to be on this panel, said, well, but we're not scholars of drawings. I mean, we're scholars who study drawings, but like we're not drawings people. We want to be, and so I wonder about categories in this way. And I was talking to a knowledgeable friend earlier who said that it feels like there are fewer Americanists who study or who identify themselves as drawings people than if one compares to historians of French or British or Italian art. And so I was kind of wondering, why? Do you agree with that statement? And if so, can we speculate on the history of our field, the places of drawings that we encounter them? Do you have thoughts in response?
I don't think Americanists are any less engaged by drawings than other fields. That's not been my experience. I can't speak to everybody else, but my journey has been really threaded through drawings from the beginning. My mom is an artist and she draws, and so charcoal and all these materials have been part of my journey from the beginning. She went to the museum school at Boston, and so I grew up with all of this, and I feel like then I got into how artists became artists, and then I got into two drawings collections, and so my experience at least has not been segregated by medium in any meaningful way. And I would say most of the people that I know don't feel any sense. I mean, certainly doesn't sound like Stuart feels any hesitation about buying drawings, even though he was the curator of paintings and sculpture at the Met. And so, I enjoy the unique attributes of different mediums, and I actually find it incredibly illuminating to see an artist developing an idea in one medium, like you were saying about Homer, and continuing to sort of thread it in, and how those ideas germinate and how they proceed through the creative process. I just love that. I love being with the artist and discovering with them or traveling with them through that creative process. And it is a sense of invitation that I feel across media. And drawing is definitely, maybe it's because it's a unique work of art, whereas printmaking might be a little bit, I don't know, but I don't feel that either. And I feel like there is a kind of opportunity there in the richness of creativity that I really like it when there is a range of practice on the part of a given artist.
I think that if one selects to collect in one area, it doesn't mean that one isn't looking at everything. And I don't think that anything is collected in a vacuum. And just personally, while we have been collecting American drawings, we've also bought a certain number of paintings, and we've collected heavily in the American decorative arts field, furniture, silver, and other things. So I don't think any of this exists in a vacuum, although there's nothing to stop one from specializing in one thing or another. And there are many factors that come into play as to why you go after one kind of thing rather than another. I mean, if economically I had been in a position to buy the great Mount oil or the great Bingham oil or the great coal oil, our collection might have been different, but we were doing things that we could do and to do at the level at which we wanted to do it.
There are some hierarchies to consider. I mean, works on paper, right? We know there's a hierarchy there. They can't, in the museum context especially, they can't be on the walls all the time in the way that paintings can be and sculptures can be on view all the time. And I think also like the subfield of American art is such a new one relatively that I think a lot of the foundational scholars in the field, right, had to like justify like American art is good and here's a good painting, you know, and so it's like I think there was probably much more of a focus on that. So I do think there are probably fewer, you know, graduate students writing dissertations specifically on an American artist's drawings, where there's no shortage of people dissertating about like French drawings and Italian drawings. And I also think just back to your first question in this Q&A portion, it's also a weird subfield because there aren't that many panels that are like, what is French art? Where we have like, what is American art, right? It's like this, there are all of these unanswered questions and constantly evolving things. But I think, yeah, in terms of drawings, I think that there are just some hierarchies that we've inherited and are still sort of working through, at least when we're talking about early drawings, 18th century, 19th century. Although I want to shout out local colleagues at the Harvard Art Museums, Penley Knipe and Miriam Stewart, who just did a wonderful show called, I'm going to mess it up, but Shade Smudge Sketch, something like that, about just different drawing media and all the different practices. And it was just this incredible celebration of different types of mark making and materials. And it was focused on, you know, European and American art from about the 18th through like today. And it was just incredible, yeah, to see so many fantastic American drawings and the breadth of that. Yeah.
Well, picking up a few strands of thinking about the history of our field of fields, right, studying American art, I realized that we have a whole range of career lengths represented on the stage, right? From 15-ish years to much more than that. But I was hoping to ask you to think back across the breadth of your careers. And I feel like we've hinted at this a little bit, but to think about, have there been particularly noteworthy changes to this approach to studying and collecting American drawings over whatever period of time that might be? Anything that you could put your finger on as a particular either trend in terms of interests in collecting and studying these media, or things that got new attention now that weren't getting attention in the past, things that might define then how we go forward.
I think that you've seen a slide of Madame X, and our acquisition of that was quite serendipitous. I knew a woman in London whose name was Wren Pittman, and she was a descendant of woman who had given the Metropolitan Museum a very substantial group of Sargent drawings and watercolors. And we became good friends, and whenever she was here, I saw her, and whenever I was in London, I went for dinner or whatever. And on one visit to London, she asked if I would go out to the country with her for the weekend. And I thought that was a great invitation. She had a house in Odstock near Salisbury. And I went to dinner at her home in Chelsea the night before we were to go out. And she said that she unfortunately could not go, but the staff is on, and please go and take a friend if you like. And so I went. And she said, there's just one thing I want in exchange, and that is, would you please write down anything you can tell me about the many Sargents that are around the house? And it was an amazing place with, I mean, I'm sure I didn't see everything, but I certainly saw 75 pictures by Sargent. Well, in the bedroom that I occupied, there was next to the fireplace a whole stack of drawings. And I went through them because I was trying to behave and tell her about what she had there. And one of them was the drawing of Madame Gautreau. And when I got back home, I sent her the information that I had written down. And I asked if there was any chance that she would sell me the drawing of the Madame. And she wrote back and she said, well, you're mistaken. I don't own that drawing anymore. And I wrote back and I said, well, Ren, you do own it. It's about halfway through the stack to the right of the fireplace in the room that I occupied. So I got a letter back and she said, well, how could I say no when I didn't even know that I owned the drawing? And so happily, well, she then told me what she wanted for it. So that put a little bit of a damper on it. But I was very friendly with the New York collectors, Margaret and Raymond Horowitz. And I went over and I showed them a photograph of the drawing, which in the meantime she had sent me. No, she hadn't sent to me. It was in a Sargent drawing show at the Corcoran. I had the catalog. So I took it over to show Margaret and Raymond, and their eyes were the size of saucers and said, you're thinking about yes or no? And so I did buy the drawing. And I must say that when I went out to Kennedy Airport to pick up the crate, I was trembling because I was so happy that it had come to us. And it sort of continued the aspect of drawings for major American paintings. But as I said, we quickly got derailed.
Yeah, that's a great question. The only thing I can think about right now is how excited I am that the John Wilson show is at the Met right now. So John Wilson was a 20th century Black artist from Boston. And we have, I think, the largest institutional collection of John Wilson's work at the MFA. And my colleagues, Edward Saywell and Patrick Murphy, originated that John Wilson show at the MFA. And you know, I can see his some of his like charcoal portraits so vividly in my mind because they are so incredible. And I'm mentioning this because when I'm thinking about how has the collecting trends changed in American drawings, and we talked about, you know, how exciting it is to think more regionally maybe about American art. You know, I think there is an increased emphasis on the local. I should mention that I was at the Boston Athenaeum before, which its works on paper collections are really, really strong in specifically Boston and New England material, and that was our collecting focus. And so similarly at the MFA, we're really excited to build, you know, collections of local artists, like whether that means Copley or Alan Rohan Crite, who was a mentor to John Wilson, or it's John Wilson, or more contemporary artists. I think that is something we're really excited to continue building. I think, you know, historically museums wanted that list of the canon and to put check marks next to certain names. And I think, you know, we're not going to pass up fantastic drawings by artists who don't have local connections, of course, but I think that there is renewed excitement and focus on that.
And I would just, you know, embellish that answer to say that, I think in some ways the shift has happened in the course of my 25 years or so, that we went from really cataloging collections and doing these sort of highlight shows of core collections, trying to document them, publish them, get the word out. Digital databases were just starting when I was in college and graduate school. And so trying to make people aware of what was in these institutions, creating, publishing sort of selections, was really a big force in the beginning of the 21st century. What my perception is that in some ways drawings have a kind of enhancing effect to the wider expansion of the field, especially to represent more women artists and more artists of color. And I think, broadly speaking, that by being more actively engaged with drawing and other media, especially watercolor, things that are more affordable and that were more widely practiced through history, we actually see we're more able to tell a wider story of artistic practice. And I think that is really where the air has gone into the balloon of drawings in recent years, is it allows us to kind of widen the arc. And you beautifully described the folk collections of the Carolicks, but that extends to outsider and the 20th century artists who were incredibly poor and still felt the compulsion to make work that is not necessarily fitting comfortably within, you called it the hierarchy, but the sort of conventional practice of oil painting and bronze sculpture or marble sculpture. There is a sort of drawing widens the kind of understanding of creative practice in meaningful ways. And to me, that's the way in which I see drawing and projects around drawing, including the Wilson Project, Charles White, so many others, that there has been a kind of growth of appreciation on a wider public's part about the story of American art.
I just want to double down on that because that's like such a fantastic point, right? That like when we broaden the media that we're interested in, we open up the circle for the artists that we can include. And I mean, I talked about Fanny Palmer for all of 5 seconds, but like museums had to first appreciate Currier and Ives and like historical American prints, and then we got to Fanny Palmer, and now there's all of this exciting research being done on her. And I think that's just a fantastic point, and I really appreciate that.
I love wrapping up our conversation on that point and broadening now our conversation to include all of you. So we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. Anderson has a mic, and yes, this gentleman in the back.
Christina, you mentioned Homer originally was a commercial illustrator. I've noticed in my collecting niche, a lot of artists had been illustrators. Warhol was an illustrator, Reginald Marsh, Hopper, and so on. It seems like it's a permeable boundary. One generation's illustrator is a later generation's fine artist. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question. And I also know we have at least one colleague from the Yale Center for British Art here, and I just wanted to shout out the Turner exhibition that they had fairly recently, because I just happened to walk through it at a very formative point in the Homer show when we sort of knew we wanted to talk about his origins as an illustrator, even though this was a watercolor show, and we wanted to include oil paintings that we have in our collection already, even though this is a watercolor show. And the Turner show followed a very similar rhythm, and he also had this background as an illustrator, worked in watercolor, worked in oil, and embraced abstraction toward the end. And I just wanted to mention that. And as you said, there are so many artists with these parallels. I think very few artists until recently, woke up and said I'm going to be a painter, and just were able to dive right into it. For Homer, even though he came from a respectable family, that he still had to earn a living, and so he did that. But there was always, I think, this desire on his part to become an established artist with a cap, fine artist, right? And to the second part of your question, how do we differentiate that? I mean, I adore N.C. Wyeth, but because he was, you know, an illustrator. And I'm also maybe not the best person to answer this question because I actually really prefer working on like illustration and popular art and thinking about the way art makes its way into people's homes, middle-class homes, working-class homes. And I really enjoy kind of muddying those boundaries personally. And I think that keeps things interesting and it keeps us all on our toes.
What's the status or availability, whatever, of drawings in the colonial period, say 1750 to, you know, up to the Revolution? What's the story on that type of drawing?
Well, that's a very difficult field because there aren't very many artists who are of any consequence. There's Copley, John Singleton Copley. There's Mather Brown. There's John Greenwood, who did drawings, but they were largely done abroad. But there's very, very little. Later in the 18th century, there's John Trumbull, and Yale has a huge collection of Trumbull drawings. But in terms of ones that come on the market, it happens very rarely. About, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, an heir to a group of Trumbull drawings died, and those drawings came on the market, and one of our two came that way. But I think by now they have probably all gone to collections where they will reside. But there's really not very much out there in that world. I mean, Henrietta Johnston I spoke of, and the problem with Henrietta Johnston is, well, both rarity, but most importantly, condition, because she worked essentially in Charleston, South Carolina, and she backed all of her drawings with wood. And the bugs got into the wood, and the bugs got into the drawings, and many of them are in absolutely horrendous condition. The lucky thing about the green drawings, while they were original, and one still is, and the drawings that we bought, is that they are of New York subjects. And there are 4 known pastels by her that were done in New York. And we don't have those climactic conditions, and therefore the drawings have remained in absolutely perfect condition. But it's very hard to find work by her to begin with, and then condition is a really paramount issue.
So I'm very curious, starting the very first slide that we saw was the Murphy slide of the human body, and it immediately made me think of photography. And I'm interested in what you think about how a new medium like that was coming up to its own around the middle of the 19th century, and then did that impact drawing specifically and get these people going, whoa, wait a minute, we got a whole new competition from photographers, but also were they using photography in their drawing practices?
Photography was a very important tool for artists, especially in the later 19th century, American and European, and people like Thomas Eakins. Photography was an integral form of practice for him, very important to his development of his ideas, an art form for him in and of itself. Albert Bierstadt was a photographer before he was a painter. And so, you know, there are real connections across forms, and definitely photography adds new avenues for these artists to develop their thinking, new ways to capture an idea, in some cases, and using certain photographic techniques faster than others. Abbey, who I talked about, used photography to blow up his images in a lot of cases. So it was very important to him as he was scaling up. And so, you know, I think this used to be an uncomfortable question for people, like, oh, is this cheating for artists? Should they not be reliant on this technology? Is this a shortcut? I really think that's gone away as a kind of point of anxiety. The fact is that we inhabit a world of photography now, and, you know, there is a sort of richness that it adds to our ability to to think visually. And this is especially over the course of the 19th century. Photography is introduced in 1839, and it becomes a kind of central tool, and it becomes a staple of people's lives. In the later 19th century, as the Brownie camera gets introduced and becomes universally accessible, and it, as you were saying, it's in everyone's home. The snapshot becomes part of life, and that is very much part of artists' experience too. It's a tool for study, it's a tool for reproduction of works of art, all of these things. And so it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. And so there is a sort of richness that photography adds. Some people, especially in the 19th century, debated whether or not photography was an art form. I think that's kind of over now. But it's always interesting to read these things. I mean, I told our colleagues at the Met about these crazy people that I had to deal with in the course of our show saying, well, drawing's not really finished art. And I was sort of struck by the prevalence of that kind of perception, even in the present, or perhaps it was a sort of recidivism. But it was interesting to me to hear people articulate what I considered really antique perspectives about, what is and is not art.
So, I feel like these are just good topics for more conversation, maybe over a drink of some kind, while looking at fabulous works of art in the next rooms. So please join me in thanking our panelists warmly, and have a lovely evening.